What is up, the YouTube Steam blockchain? So today I want to talk a little bit about the free market, and it's kind of is one of these interesting topics. So I was reading an article today about in Italy. In Veneto, they confiscated 250 tubes of Prosecco flavored Pringles bottles, and it also had the text Prosecco on it. So Pringles, basically without permission, they used, let's say, Prosecco, the brand. You can say, depending on how you look at brands. Now, I'm not sure if Pringles, if they also use Prosecco inside of the Pringles bottle of the crisps, or if it was just that they used the text, because they had a special edition of Pringles that they released for a Christmas, I think 2018, or maybe it was 2017. But they did a special Pringles bottles, and they had the Prosecco text on it. So they basically used this without asking for permission from Prosecco if they could use that sort of text. And I want to talk a little bit about, so Prosecco didn't like it, the brand, they're doing wine. So it's interesting to sort of look at this, how I think how this in some ways ties into the so-called world we're going into, where people are gonna sort of remix more, they're gonna experiment more, especially when, I mean, we know in this whole decentralized movement how in many ways decentralized, in some aspects you can almost decentralize everything eventually. Hardware, production of goods and services, and you can make, so a lot of these stuff eventually happens more locally. At the same time, this is also going to make it so almost anyone can make a brand, anyone can make a token, anyone can run their own experiments, anyone can make sort of their own product and sort of experiment. For example, I mean, it is a good question if, I mean, we do have these big problems, for example, in the smartphone world with monopolies on of patents and stuff like that, and how you have this sort of constant struggle between monopolies and sort of people that sort of want some form of free market. And it's kind of interesting to sort of see this play out, and it's like, it's very interesting, this topic of is using a couple of words, are you using someone else's product if you're using a couple of words. I mean, this is something also that we see in this whole battle of we see how people want to share a lot of videos and songs and stuff like that, and then you have this copyright thing going on that sort of wants to stop the sharing ability, and how we're sort of moving into a rent and share sort of world where people just want to experiment more. And it's kind of interesting how it in many ways clash with a lot of systems that might want to have it more might want to have it more the same. So, for example, we've seen in supermarkets, we sort of see how corporations and stuff like that that are producing goods and services, that are producing new products. Maybe they do a chocolate bar. You've started to see lately how they try to do so many different flavors, or how they try to experiment, how they can sort of bring a more exciting product to the market, so people sort of will pick their product over someone else. And we're sort of seeing also this in terms of in terms of people producing their own sort of media. So they're making their own videos. They're sort of they're this is sort of being called the Creative Commons. That sort of people of sort of finding ways to share goods and services between themselves more locally, so they can do it cheaper, more affordable, and sort of instantly go more to niche-based stuff that they exactly want. So it's interesting to see this battle here, where Pringles, they sort of wants to do some experimentations, and I have done this, for example, in on YouTube. So for example, I noticed that the more brands I use and the more I sort of remix it and combines it into one video, usually you can have a more win-win sort of effect. So for example, I did a video pouring Coca-Cola on a Samsung phone and an iPhone, and I used the Apple, Samsung, Coca-Cola, and YouTube. So I used all of these different brands, and when you remix it, you can usually gain more popularity. And it's sort of interesting how everything sort of will be how everything sort of will be remixed in many ways. And I don't really think it is something that is bad, because it's just in let's say human nature that they sort of wants to experiment. They want to try different things. So for example, let's say I have a so we see how eventually this, in many ways, how it's going to change a lot of things. Like let's say I have a 3D printer, and I can sort of make my own clothes, or I can make my own glasses. And let's say I print the text Gucci on it, and let's say I sell that to a friend, and he pays me in some digital tokens. Everything basically happened locally, and you can sort of have these events happen in just the Creative Commons, which seems like it takes away something from the larger market, but I don't really think it does. I actually do think that it just creates more creativity, just as when people are going to create their own full-time movies or full-time documentaries, and uh, even when you are gonna see a lot of other experimentations, probably with artificial intelligence, is gonna try to combine different brands, try to create a different product, try to see how they sort of can play and experiment. And a lot of this experimentation in many ways is gonna be permissionless. So they're basically not gonna go and ask the brands if they can use the name. And this is also something that we see in domain names, that people sort of trying, oh, you can't sort of use this sort of domain name. But I think the more and more people sort of going to realize that people are just going to experiment more. And I would say that if you actually look at the experimentations that people are doing, uh, it's pretty harmless actually. It's usually just is something that they're doing a little bit, and I think that with new technologies, eventually people are going to see that all of this can eventually have win-win effects on all sides, especially if you tokenize all of the brands, so everyone can have a share in all of the brands. Then everyone basically has an incentive for every brand to sort of grow and scale, and to become better. So I don't in many ways think that in the future that Pringles or Prosecco, that all of these brands will have to sort of fight so much. I think that we're more going into a world where, well, you could tokenize all the brands, and people that want to buy into a brand, that loves a brand, that think they're going to succeed in the future also, they can sort of be a shareholder in that. And that makes it more fun, more engaging, and you can then make it more fair. So for example, what happens these days, for example, for example, with the copyright stuff, if you sort of, for example, share a video or something like that, let's say on YouTube, let's say you share some music file because you love to do it, to have it on your video. What happens then usually is 100% of the earnings goes to use the audio creator, even though you did the video. So at least it should be like 50-50%. So 50% of the earnings to the audio creator and 50% to the video creator. And then you can sort of create win-win systems on all sides. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at this, especially in a global world where sort of everything is going to be connected. And the topic of identity, also identity theft and so on, it's kind of interesting because that's also going to be, let's say, a global discussion in many ways, with not just not just stuff that's being produced, but also how will identity and stuff like that, how will that be connected to how humans live, and the identity to themselves, how what is an identity and all this. It's something that I think that a lot of people are going to talk about in the future, sort of what they identify with. But yeah, I mean, it's basically we're going to see a lot more experimentations here in the future when hardware gets cheaper, when software gets cheaper, and it's going to be interesting to see sort of what comes out of that. And I really do think it can be win-win in the long term for all sides. And yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. Have an awesome day, DTube and Steam blockchain.